Reactor online, sensors online, weapons online, all systems, yeah, you know.
Hey everyone, B1B Flyer here. In this video I'm going to review the miniatures contained in the Battletech Clan Invasion box set, as well as the Elemental Star box. I've already completed a unboxing of the Battletech Clan Invasion set, so if you want to see that, the link will be at the end of the video. Alright, the first one in the set is the Adder, or the Puma if you're an Inner Sphere fan. You can see here compared to the original metal sculpt that it is definitely a little taller as well as a little more heftier in mass and bulk. I definitely like the improvements of the arms as well as the increase in size of the legs. It really makes it seem more functional as well as believable that a mech of several meters tall would be able to walk using a little bit more of a support structure underneath it versus the spindly little ones from the older sculpt. So onto the sculpt of the miniature itself. Overall, there's a pretty good amount of detail. There's a bit of a squat or a squished leg here on my particular one I got. I believe it's because the foot was maybe glued a little bit slightly canted, so you can see there's a bit of a bow on the right leg. I'll fix that with some hot water. Additionally, the arms have maybe a little bit of an outward bow to the barrels, but it's nothing that would even be something to worry about overall. For mold lines, there is one that kind of goes right across the front of the torso here. That one will be a little bit annoying to get to. There's some flash down here just due to the tightness of the leg and arm proximity will be kind of difficult if your particular one has a little bit more or something more noticeable. But other than that, everything else would be easy for cleanup to get to. And honestly, a lot of the lines follow a hard edge, which is really nice, and I'm appreciative of that because it makes the modeling preparation so much easier. I really like the increased size of the arms. That was really something that kind of didn't convince me about being PPCs on the older sculpts. They were just so tiny compared to the rest of the miniature and other PPCs from mechs that are much larger. Next up is the Grendel, or Mongrel. This guy is one of the few that is actually shorter than the older metal version, but he's definitely got more bulk and size to him. Of the 5 sculpts in the box, this one is actually my favorite as far as detail and cleanliness of the model is concerned. This one just has real sharp detail, real crisp lines, very few mold lines that are going to be difficult to remove if at all, and it just really presents a lot of little unique improvements over the original sculpt. The 7 jump jet ports, the detail on the barrel, just the little things like the depth of the SRM launcher, all those things add up to make a really good looking improvement over the previous metal version, which is really the goal of a lot of this as well. So I'm really happy with this one. If you want to move the arm, it is glued here, so you could cut it, or honestly I'll probably just end up twisting it and re-gluing it back on. You could also get pretty easy access to the torso and to the legs if you want to repose. This particular sculpt has lots of working room for anybody that is interested in trying to make some interesting dynamic modifications. Moving on to the Nova, or Blackhawk. I don't actually have a very old or even an updated sculpt of this model in metal, so I've just got it standing next to the Adder as well. You can see though that the biggest difference, if you're a follower of Battletech and you've been around for a while, that the Nova now has a hip joint. This was a design change just to give it a more dynamic, realistic feel by the designers. I don't have any problem with it, honestly. I like both versions, so you'll probably see folks cut out the hip torso area and connect it to the arms the way the original miniature looked, and I think both of them will look fine. You can see that height-wise, though, it would definitely bring it back down to a much more squat and short appearance, but again, that's the way it originally was designed in the artwork and the several years of the first runs of the miniatures, so I don't fault anybody for wanting to go back to that. For the miniature quality itself, I think the legs turned out really well. I like the way they've been at least enhanced as far as the detail are concerned. The downside to this model are going to be the jump jet ports. There's just some odd little errors and flaws, or they could be flash that's sitting on the top there, but it's going to be a little bit difficult to clean up and have it look as crisp as some of the other models. There's a little bit of this and that on the bottom side of the arms for the barrels and stuff. That'll be easy to either hide or just not even worry about. The main areas that you'll have to clean up really is just going to be the tops of these arms where there's a seam And then there's a little bit of work to do around the side of the torsos and some of the details here, but because they stick out fairly well, I think it'll be easy for folks to clean up if they wish. Now to the iconic Timberwolf or Mad Cat. I've got the latest metal sculpt. I've reposed it and changed the missiles to a different configuration, but you can see even then it's still definitely smaller in mass as well as height. But again, I think a lot of these size differences and changes are for the better. It really makes it seem like a walking tank. There are options for adding plastic versus adding more metal, which is more costly. Really opens up the ability of Catalyst to make these larger, just hulking giant walking tanks of doom seem more prevalent in the actual model process. So I really appreciate that. First off, I'm gonna address the big foot post here. So I'm not a fan of this. This is not cool, and as far as the way I think it looks. So it basically, it ties your hands one way or the other. You either need to put a bunch of filler in there, sand or base filler. I have ways to do that as well on the channel. You can see some videos in some of the basing tutorials I've done. Or you're gonna need to cut it and then figure out how you want to have the leg positioned. It can be floating here, or you can be moved back. I've seen some folks change the position. You get a little bit of an inward cant, which I like because it adds more of a dynamic look, like it really is mid-stride, because you know it wouldn't just be completely perpendicular and mechanically walking. There's going to be some flex and requirement to add a little bit of that locomotion. But just with this sculpt, having that raised post, it really makes things more difficult, especially if you're just getting into the game or learning how to hobby. It's not the end of the world, but I wish they would have done something a little bit different with the legs, similar to what they did on the Pride version in the Legendary Mech Warriors box. And I'll compare the two during a video reviewing those. You definitely get an improvement on the arms as far as the size of the joints and the upper arm area, so it's less prone to bending. You get a lot of detail on the back of the miniature that you definitely did not get on most of the previous sculpts. You do get the bottom of the torso here is a cup that sits on top of the hip, and then the upper torso rests inside of that. So there is a seam through here. It's really not that tough to break out, but there might be a little bit of errors here or there that might require some work potentially. And then for the missiles, mine came fairly straight or fairly aligned. I have seen some odd ones. It's just a small post that they're glued on. You can come from the side with a hobby knife and cut it if you need to, but in most cases you're just going to be able to fix it with hot water. For seams, the major one is going to be the one that runs around the top of the front leg. It's not too bad. It's a little bit of scraping of a back of a hobby blade or a little bit of sanding and some brass brush work will take care of this model pretty well. There may be a little bit of issues with some of the gun barrels just because that's where flash tends to accumulate. But again, if you're careful with a hobby knife or you just don't even mind, it's not something that's going to ruin the model. There's a little bit more here on the torso. But overall, I'm very happy with the actual sculpt. I did want to mention the fronts of the upper legs. There's like this 3-point merging of these areas where the mold was being pressed together, and you end up with these odd looking, they're definitely not meant to be raised panels. So they are kind of hidden as the model stands on its own, so you can probably get away with a little bit of scraping, but that's the largest detractor of this model there. But again, I do like the sculpt. It's a solid improvement amongst the advanced iterations of this model. I just wish there would have been a little bit more work to fix this issue right here. Next up is the Executioner or Gladiator, and this is a big boy. So that's an original sculpt metal on the right. So it's a little bit smaller than the resculpt metal if you're familiar with the releases. However, the spread of the legs, the broadness of the shoulders, torso, arms, everything just makes this guy scream 95 tons, and it's definitely a larger miniature in comparison to anything that's been made metal. For the sculpt itself, again, just a little bit of flash or a little bit of seams on the front upper panels here, but they're very faint, at least on mine, and I would have no problem being able to take those down. There is a small, I believe it's the press area where they go and remove it from the mold. It's a circle, so I think when that pushes out, that's left an indentation on this upper arm here. It's a little bit tricky to maybe completely remove, but again, it's not super noticeable. The rest of the miniatures got a lot of detail. There was a little bit of, I guess this is maybe pressing or rippling On the plastic, again, it's a flat surface, so you can sand it out or scrape it away and probably get away with not ever having to find it again. But this is definitely another really good quality, high detailed sculpt that really doesn't have a whole lot of flash or mold lines to remove that would be really, you know, just glaring at you once you painted your model, which is great because I've missed several of them on the plastic ones and the 3D prints that I've had to do. So there's always something that I tend to miss, and you know, it's okay, it doesn't ruin the model, it's not, you know, like that. But if you're trying to reduce as much of that so you get the greatest looking finished product, then you know, it's nice to start from a spot where there's not a whole lot of those. Again, this is really something I do appreciate, is having just the large size of this model. Just its presence on the battlefield is screaming, I'm an assault mech, come at me. And the ability of having something this large and plastic and being at the price point that it's at is really appealing. Alright, finally, the elementals. So I'll talk about the Battletech Clan Elemental Star box simply because all it has are the same 5 stands of elementals. There's no cards, it's just a retail box with 5 of the same stands of elementals. There's no change. You can see here I've got them standing next to some of the very old Battletech original infantry, which is generally considered scaled at 8mm, as well as the original clan elementals off to the far right, which is also definitely a larger scale. So the elementals have actually gotten smaller, but it's relative to the scaling of the rest of the mechs that were redone, so it does correct things back. And if you have any of the more recent, much smaller basic infantry, inner sphere infantry, they are smaller and would definitely scale next to these new elementals more correctly, making the occupant of the battle armor seem like they're, you know, a solid foot and a half taller than a normal human. For the stands themselves, like I said, they're all the same. That is one of the detractors of this, I feel, is that everything is the exact same. Now, I don't mind the jumping sculpts, I don't mind the guy with the jettisoned SRM launchers and all of that. I just wish it wouldn't have been the exact same ones on every single stand. Again, that's a minor critique overall. I'm happy to have 5 different poses of you know, these elementals that I can use, but that's really the one thing that I wish they could have done a little bit differently. The smoke plumes look great. There's a lot of, you know, back of my mind options for these, as far as, you know, cutting them off and using them for jump jets for mechs, or for shortening them down and making the elemental look like he's jumping off of something shorter, or even off of a mech he's been riding on to get into battle. There's not a lot of cleanup to do on these simply because they're so small, and it really is hidden very well. There's not a whole lot of areas where I would try to go in with a knife or clippers or anything to do, just because I don't want to damage the miniature, but it's also just, it's so small that it's not even worth taking the time to deal with. There might be a little bit maybe on some of the smoke plumes that will show up for you, but overall, these are almost, I would say, almost ready right out of the box from what I've seen, which is great. For those of you that were wanting to know how to remove them, the 2 jumping areas, or jumping elementals, have a square post with a bit of a negative recess to line them up, so that's what sits behind these 2. For the front 3, they all have pegs on the bottom of the feet that set into the actual hex base. So what does that mean? It means you have plenty of workability with the jumping sculpt, because you could take them off of one, or take these jumping ones off and make 5 all on the same hex base if you wanted to, and all you're going to be doing basically is gluing the bottoms, which is easy. Conversely, the individual ones, if you cut them off, you're going to be stuck with some small surface area on the bottom of the feet, and you're going to have your work cut out for you, at least in trying to get them to stand where you want. But it's not as so small that it's you know, crazy. It's just going to be a little more work trying to get them off. If you do cut them off, please be careful. Rest them on something, cut downward and away from yourself, and then rotate the hex base and work to the nearest lower one. You don't want to try to cut towards yourself, because there's not a lot of material and it's very easy to slip. So please be careful if you're going to do that. Hot water will also work on these, so if you want to change the direction or move an arm. The ideas I'm already starting to have are things like, oh, I don't know, maybe a Omni-Mech carrying in some infantry, holding on. You know, you can see where I'm going with that, and I'm sure we're going to see some folks get real creative with adding in their there are ablative wounds there, or ablative armor for Omni-Mechs. So a lot of fun stuff that you can do with that. I hope that helps you get some insight to the quality of the miniatures and what to look out for. Tex, take us out of here.
We certainly hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe and leave your questions or comments below. Follow us on Facebook at Battletech Camo Specs Online. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Heat critical, shutdown imminent. Time for Pop-Tarts.